Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is a lesson in American government. This lesson is from Unit 5 about the executive branch, and it's Lesson 13 about the bureaucracy. In this lesson, you'll learn about what the bureaucracy is, you'll learn about the structure of the bureaucracy, you'll learn about the president's cabinet, about the spoils system, the merit system, and about red tape. The federal bureaucracy can be illustrated by a photo like this. A bunch of people in a big room sitting at desks doing small but potentially important tasks, paperwork, things like that. Because the federal bureaucracy is made up of the 4 million members of the executive branch who execute the nation's laws. The president has 4 million people working for him because it takes that many to do all the stuff that the Congress has asked the executive branch to do. So how is this massive bureaucracy structured then? Well, we're going to talk about 4 aspects of its structure. The first can be seen in the Department of State, pictured in this photo. The national government's bureaucracy is first of all divided up into big units that we call departments. The Department of State is but one of them. These are the biggest divisions of the bureaucratic structure of the federal government. The leaders of these departments then form what is called the presidential cabinet. Here's a picture of a presidential cabinet meeting when George W. Bush was president. The individuals seated around this big table are the heads of those departments. The Vice President of the United States is also a member of the President's cabinet, but it's primarily composed of the 15 executive department heads. Those people are called secretaries. So we have a Secretary of Agriculture, a Secretary of Commerce, a Secretary of Defense, etc. They're called secretaries with one exception. The person who leads the Justice Department is the Attorney General of the United States, mentioned here at the end of this list. In the other cases, the person who leads, say, the Department of Veteran Affairs is the Secretary of Veteran Affairs. The person who leads the Department of Labor is the Secretary of Labor, etc. It's this group of people who make up the president's cabinet, who are supposedly supposed to be the top advisors to the president, who work with him closely about how the government is doing all the jobs that the president has been assigned to do by laws passed by the United States Congress. So that then gives us our first structure of the bureaucracy, the departments. These are the major divisions of the bureaucratic infrastructure of the country. The next way that the bureaucracy is divided up is in subdivisions of departments called agencies, offices, or bureaus. The most famous of these is the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, which is a subdivision of the Department of Justice. So you have the national government, executive branch, divided up into 15 departments. One of those 15 departments is the Justice Department, headed by the Attorney General of the United States. And then that's further subdivided into other units, and one of those is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And every department is divided up into smaller units like that also. This then gives us our second aspect of the bureaucratic structure. Underneath departments in this hierarchical organization are agencies, offices, and bureaus. The next kind of thing that you'll find in the bureaucracy are what are called independent agencies. These are agencies that are set up by Congress when they create them to exist outside the normal bureaucratic structure. These independent agencies don't report to someone above them in the hierarchy. In a way, they don't even report to the president. The President of the United States may be able to appoint the leaders of these independent agencies, but then he can't turn around and fire them if he doesn't like what they're doing. Not only that, typically with an independent agency, the term of office of the person serving there is staggered in a way that a president can't appoint two in a row, at least not usually. So a head of an independent agency, for example, might have a 5-year term. So the president takes office with somebody left over from the previous president, then appoints his own, and then there's another election that comes up before there's an opportunity to appoint somebody else. The idea of making these agencies independent outside the normal bureaucratic structure with leaders who can't be fired by the president is they don't want these agencies politicized. A good example of why is to consider one of the most well-known independent agencies, something called the Fed. What we're really talking about here is the Federal Reserve System, the people who control the nation's money supply. Potentially a president of the United States, if he had real authority over the Fed, could manipulate them into doing things with the nation's money supply to make the president look better so he can get reelected, for example, but do long-term damage to the country in the process. A president who's selfishly just trying to get reelected could potentially choose to do things like that. The idea of making these agencies independent is to avoid that conflict. They're off on their own, doing their own thing. In a sense, they don't care what the president thinks. This then gives us our third element of the bureaucratic structure, independent agencies. The final element can be seen in this photo of vans for the United States Postal Service. The fourth element is government corporations. Businesses that are owned by the U.S. government, like the United States Postal Service. These are things that are supposed to be turning profits like any other business. They oftentimes don't, but they don't go bankrupt and out of business anyway because the federal government just shuffles some tax dollars over there to keep the doors open because they consider what they're doing important. But theoretically, these should be businesses and they should be run by businesses. They just happen to be owned by the U.S. government. And the United States Postal Service is the best example of this. So that then gives us our fourth type of structure in the bureaucracy of the United States of America. So now that we know how the bureaucracy is structured, let's talk about how it's staffed. And the way it's staffed has evolved over our country's history. To begin with, early in the history of the United States of America, the bureaucracy was staffed through what was called the spoils system, or patronage was another name for it. This system was particularly developed by President Andrew Jackson, who was president in the early 1800s. Under the spoils system, a political party, after winning an election, hands out jobs as rewards to people who supported the political party during the election. So a candidate like Andrew Jackson could build up a bunch of support for himself as president by going around during the campaign and telling local political people in towns, hey, you go out and rally the people in your town to support me, and when I get elected, I'll make you postmaster, or whatever it may be. They would hand out future jobs as incentives to get people to support them. Then when a president got elected, he would fire all the people that had been put in there by the previous president and put in a bunch of people that support him. Now, there's a good and a bad side to the spoils system. The bad side may be a little more obvious than the good side. The bad side is that when a president is picking people based on their politics, he's not picking people based on their skill. So, for example, he might pick a head of the FBI because that person was a big campaign supporter, rather than picking that person because they are the best law enforcement person. And that would be a bad thing. But there's a good side of it too. And the good side is, by the president being able to pick all these people, they are supportive of his agenda then. He gets elected telling the American people he's going to do X, Y, and Z. He can then pick people who are on board trying to do X, Y, and Z also. If we were stuck with the bureaucracy of a previous president, it may be filled with people who actually oppose the things he's elected to do. But you don't have to worry about that with the spoils system. Now, another potential problem with the spoils system, though, is illustrated by what happened to President James Garfield. When he was running for office, there was a man who, from a couple of conversations with Garfield, thought he had been promised a job in Garfield's administration. When he failed to get the job, he then got angry and he assassinated the President of the United States, James Garfield. In response to the assassination of James Garfield, the United States Congress decided that maybe they needed to change the spoils system. Maybe the problem wasn't one crazy guy shooting the president, but a system that encouraged people who think they had been promised jobs as political favors, even if they didn't. Maybe the problem was promising jobs for political reasons in the first place. So after the assassination of James Garfield, the United States Congress passed a law called the Pendleton Act, which did away with the spoils system. What it did was it instead transformed the way that we select people to serve in the executive branch into what's become known as the merit system. Well, what is the merit system? Well, it's run by a group in the government called the Civil Service, and they're the ones who pick people for these jobs now, not the president. Now, there are exceptions to this. The president still gets to personally appoint a few people at the top of the bureaucracy, like the cabinet members, for example. But the lower level of the bureaucracy, the president's no longer involved in the choosing. Instead, the civil service does it through the merit system. Now, the government's grown so big in our country's history that the president couldn't have continued to do it entirely through the spoils system, even if he wanted to. But it doesn't matter because the spoils system has been eliminated with the Pendleton Act of 1883 in response to the assassination of James Garfield. So what does this mean then to have a merit system? How do you get a job in government now? For example, how would you get a job as a mail carrier for the United States Postal Service? The way you get it now is you take a test. That is the merit system in a nutshell. They try to find people through some sort of evaluation mechanism who they believe will be best suited to the job that's being offered. So there's an obvious good side of this. You're going to get qualified people into these positions, hopefully. The bad side, though, is you're going to get people who have no loyalty to the president. They're loyal to their own ideals, their own goals, which means they could be potentially in conflict with the president. You have a president elected to do something, and the bureaucracy that supposedly works for him refuses to help. So what other problems are there with the bureaucracy besides that? One of the biggest problems can be seen in this quote from a study done of the bureaucracy. Notice what the authors of this study say. Top performers in the bureaucracy are seldom rewarded. Poor performers are hardly ever punished for what they do wrong or held accountable in any way. Matter of fact, there's a reality that's pretty much accepted that the only way to really get in trouble as a bureaucrat and get yourself fired and lose your job is to do something really, really bad, like kill someone or something like that. As long as you avoid any really big mistakes, once you get hired in the bureaucracy, you're going to have that job for as long as you want. Well, now think about what incentive this creates. If the only way that you can lose your job is by screwing up really bad, then the way to avoid screwing up really bad is to do nothing, or at least do as little as possible. If you're not going to get fired for doing little work, not going to get fired for being lazy, not going to get fired for being incompetent, whatever it may be, the best way to avoid getting fired is to make sure you don't screw up at all, and you do that by doing nothing. This is one of the reasons why people who interact with bureaucrats, a good example of this at the state level, this is not a national government agency, but it's still a bureaucracy, is the DMV, the part of a state government that issues driver's licenses. Most people have really bad experiences with the DMV. Well, that's your sort of personal interaction with the bureaucracy, getting a driver's license. And if that's a bad experience, that illustrates for you sort of this basic problem with the bureaucracy, that they're hard to work with. And the reason they're hard to work with is they don't feel a need to be efficient in getting their jobs done. What they feel a need to do is to avoid doing things that might get them in trouble. Just don't screw up bad and you've got the job. The best way to make sure you don't screw up bad is to do nothing. Another basic problem with bureaucracies is what's called red tape. And this comes from the same source of the problem. Bureaucrats want to avoid getting in trouble, making mistakes that can be used against them. So a way to do that is to have an excess of rules and procedures that have to be formally followed, including by the customers you serve. So a bureaucratic agency may ask somebody that they're dealing with to fill out the form 3 separate times. And the reason they do that is not because it's actually a wise thing to get things done. It's a way to make sure they don't get in trouble. So if anyone ever asks them, where's that form, where's that information, they've got it 3 different places just to make sure that they don't screw it up. Well, that again makes us dealing with the bureaucracy extra hard because they continually ask us to do things that we think are stupid yet and have no real reason behind them, that make everything more difficult and take longer, but that's what they do anyway to avoid getting in trouble. Okay, so now let's review our lesson. Remember, this is the last lesson from Unit 15. What is the bureaucracy? Is it congressional staffs? Is it state legislatures? Is it executive branch workers? Or is it the lower courts? The bureaucracy, as we use the term when talking about American government, refers to the executive branch workers, the 4 million people who work for the President of the United States. What is the biggest division in the bureaucracy? Is it departments, commissions, agencies, or bureaus? Departments is the basic way that the bureaucracy is divided up. 15 of them, each then with their own organizations underneath them. Who makes up the President's cabinet? Is it the secretaries, the chief executives, the commissioners, or the directors in the government? It's the secretaries. Now, you got to be sure that you understand what this means in the context of the bureaucracy. The secretaries are the heads of these departments. They're not people working at a desk, taking notes and typing up forms. That's what secretaries are. Secretaries, within the terminology of the bureaucracy, are the leaders of these departments. How were jobs obtained through the spoils system? Did you take a test, or did you outbid your competitors? Or were you appointed by Congress? Or did you get the job because you were a supporter of the president? Under the spoils system, jobs were handed out to supporters of the president. How are jobs now obtained through the merit system? Is it by taking tests, receiving special training, by appointments from Congress, or by being a supporter of the president? Now in the merit system, most of the jobs in the executive branch are handed out by some sort of evaluation process to assess whether the person is qualified for the job. And one of the main ways to do this is to, in some positions, just have people take a test. What are excessive bureaucratic procedures called? Are they called red tape, sunset laws, Pendleton Act, or log rolling? Those excessive bureaucratic procedures designed to protect bureaucrats so they don't lose their jobs is what is called red tape. That then completes our last lesson from Unit 5. Our next lesson will be from Unit 6, and it'll be Lesson 1 about Madison's factions.